The art of flow.
Hi, welcome to the Art of Flow. This is a podcast where we talk with artists and movements, dancers and fire dancers, all about art, life, their creativity, and advice and tips for anybody who's looking for creative outlets. My name is Morgan Dolgano. I am the creator of the Art of Flow podcast. I am a flow arts enthusiast, and I am also a life coach with Ignite Vibrancy Coaching. And I am so excited to bring to you today a conversation with Josie Mae. I've kind of had a huge desire to talk with this lady after I saw her speak at a conference, and she spoke about women in juggling. Josie Mae is a contemporary circus artist and social circus educator specializing in club juggling and manipulation. They are coordinator and coach with The Voice Project, a youth training company that uses circus as an inquiry for social justice and systemic oppression, an extension of the Circus Project's Pathways programming. Her passion for this work utilizes community organization, trauma-informed practices, and a holistic and intersectional educational lens. They have served on the International Jugglers Association, the IJA board, and is the current World Juggling Day program director. They've also gone on tour with Clowns Without Borders USA. If you want more of Josie, her websites and links to social media are in the show notes below. So check it out. Thank you so much, Josie, for joining us today. I'm really curious to know, in what ways have circus arts impacted your life, mind, body, and spirit?
Cool. Thank you for having me. My answer to that question is entirely. Finding circus arts has impacted my mental health by having a movement and expression, creative expression to just move through mental health, like depression, anxiety, trauma has been so important. And having that medium to move my body has been incredible, as well as finding community and working with a community to work towards a better world. Circus arts is super powerful in that way, so I think it's kind of shaped a lot of my identity and a lot of my self-expression.
Thank you so much for sharing. I definitely really resonate with what you speak about, the elements of like healing your body from trauma and working through things somatically has a certain power. And then this other element of connecting people across diverse backgrounds and across, it really is a community, and how much you plug into the community impacts, I think, the way that you grow with the art. If you were to name 3 people who have been most influential to you in your journey through circus arts and juggling, who comes to mind?
So first off, I want to give a huge shout out to Erin Stevens. If you don't know Erin, she is a phenomenal juggler who works heavily with the IJA, the International Jugglers Association, running the international regional competitions, supporting on their social media, and outside of that, just connecting the world through the common love of juggling. And I remember meeting Erin at one of my first juggling fire festivals and just taking them for workshops and being so inspired that there was another woman out there in the scene who is so talented, so compassionate, and has definitely helped mentor me through my work with the IJA, as well as consistently being an inspiration for the juggling community at large. Like, Erin is such a hard worker and such an amazing friend and person. So that definitely, thank you, Erin. Number one, inspiration, I think, as far as like my path in juggling and circus community. It sounds cheesy, but I want to thank like or it has been really influential to me is like all of the haters or all of the people
I
who
love that. It's so great to like acknowledge the people who pushed you to grow in some ways.
totally. And even when like this person, no one specific, but like the haters as a collective, like felt like they were hating, and then that actually pushed me to look deeper into what I was experiencing and to see like, oh wow, this point is very valid, and maybe I wasn't seeing that by being clouded by my privilege or my perspective. So also people who are just like, you can't do this, and it gives that kind of added emphasis of like, I'm gonna do it and try. So I think both aspects of that, you know, like super grateful for the people who have called me out on behavior, because that allows me to go deeper in, and that is a gift, as well as people who are maybe just mean or misguided has also helped me.
It's a hard question to boil down our entire flow journey into like 3 influential people. Yeah, so Aaron Stevens for like being a mentor and pushing an inspiration to you, and then also people who are like haters or a bit judgy or pointing out the what you can't do as allowing a framework for what you to lean into. Which kind of brings me to wondering more about your flow journey. What started you juggling and where did you go from there?
So I started juggling in 2012. I was living in Peru, and I met a bunch of street performers who were performing at the semáforo, at the street lights. And it kind of, for me, became a little bit of survival of, okay, I can learn this skill and street perform and continue traveling because I'm earning money doing that. So when I left Peru, I came back to the Bay Area in California, where I grew up, and fortunately there just is a huge circus scene there. And that's where I met jugglers at the Vulcan and went to some of the fire festivals along the West Coast and all of the juggling festivals. And from there, I mean, so much. It's been 8 years. I connected with people at Camp One a Rainbow, which is a circus and performing arts camp in Laytonville, California, and went and taught there and connected with like a broader circus community. And I think that's kind of like the initial kind of push.
Can we rewind a little bit to those street performers and those first days of being exposed to juggling in Peru? Do you remember like how their view of art influenced you or how you were able to connect to learn from them? What did it look like? For context, it's very different around the world. Juggling communities, circus communities, each community has its own unique flavor or way of connecting and sharing knowledge and information, though there may be commonalities. So what street performers in Peru at that particular time of the world, because this was 8 years ago, was like.
Yeah, I think just in general, South American and Peruvian culture is so much more colorful and brighter and louder than what I've experienced in the United States. And so that was really exhilarating, of just being like loud and outspoken and in the streets performing. I think there's more of a cultural recognition of the arts, in that you can street perform at the streetlights and people expect it and often will pay you for that work, which isn't something you see in the US. It's a huge culture in South and Central America. I think some of that is from survival, and that's something, a way of making money that has very low barriers to access, so that you can learn how to juggle and go street perform.
It's very different when the way you perform is not just an artistic expression for yourself, but it's also a livelihood. And it's also survival. And I think that it's really important that you highlight that and share that framework of thinking about it can be different depending on location, and individuals' parameters of life and privilege comes up. It intersects with how we view art.
Totally. And I feel very privileged to have been able to like step into that for the brief amount of time I did, and to learn from these other artists how to juggle and how to create a 30-second routine for the street light, and how to be out street performing, essentially.
And now you're a social circus educator. So according to your website, that means that you create a safe environment for children to explore their creativity through circus arts and theater. And the lessons have a high emphasis on social emotional learning skills and peer-to-peer communication, child-led play, creative expression, all the things that we really want our children to have in life. What are some ways you've incorporated lessons in social emotional skills within the circus arts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started curriculum writing maybe 3 years ago, and always having that high emphasis on the social emotional skills, which isn't very hard with circus arts because it's just so built into the art form. The ways that circus create a container for collaboration between participants is super helpful for building confidence and communication and resiliency through juggling, right? I dropped my ball 50 and 100 times before I got a trick. And so how do you react in those moments? Really tapping into empathy and supporting students and beginners learning through that process when like feelings like frustration or low self-worth come up, anger or sadness, all of that comes up, and that's where you can step in as a role as an educator of like, okay, how are we working through this together?
The life coach in me is screaming out like, oh, are you willing to speak on that subject for yourself, what you've learned about learning through prop manipulation and juggling and circus arts?
Yeah, totally. For myself, that's been a big lesson in practice and patience and resilience. And has helped, I think, create a awareness of like patience in life, and believing hope that you will get the trick if you practice it enough. I forget who said this. Maybe it was Matt Hall. It was at some workshop, and they're like, I think it was Matt Hall, yeah, EJC. And he was like, if you knew that after 200 hours you would get the trick, or after however many hours, if it was like finite and you knew that you could get that trick, how would that impact your practice? And I think that's kind of a mindset that I've been trying to adapt to my juggling practice as well. Like, okay, if I do this enough, I will get it. Not, it's like an impossibility, because that comes up a lot, especially with higher skill tricks.
That's so interesting. I love that question of, if you knew it takes X, Y, and Z number of hours to get that trick, how would that impact the way that you train or the way you go about it? It kind of reminds me of like, someone told me about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything. Right when I was beginning to play around with poi, and I stopped getting caught up in the mindset of, this is impossible, I'm never going to be able to do it, to, well, if it takes that many hours to become an expert, I guess I'll put some more hours in. And how do you connect and create community? I know that there's a lot of different organizations you've been involved in, and you have kind of, not to make yet another juggling pun, but you have a lot of different hats that you juggle. So why does community matter to you personally?
I think community is the basis of connection, and that the more we can show up for one another in community and like really showing up for all the individuals in that community, and other communities, the intersections between communities, that is what creates care, and that's what creates unity, and that's what creates connection as we move through the 2020 timeline into the future. So
Part of it is like, so community means connection to you. It makes it possible. And then how do you bolster or boost that connection and community?
yeah, I think knowing when it's time to be creating and putting out into the community, and when it's time to be listening, when it's time to step back, right? Step up, step back, that kind of interchange between positions, being really aware of power dynamics within communities. Who is leading the events? Who's organizing? Who is attending? Who can afford to attend? Really being a kind of a general awareness of like what this community looks like, and what your role is in it, and how that can change over time. How are you setting the stage for the younger generations? How are you learning from people who have been here and doing that? And also, how are you unlearning some of the toxic behaviors that have happened in a community that, especially in the juggling world, has been founded by white cisgendered men, that has a lot to learn from other communities, that I think we can be more open to and aware of.
So by being aware and conscientious of the intersecting components that are happening within a community, the past, the present, and intentionally deciding the future, you can connect and bolster the community.
Totally. And connecting with other communities, looking around, why are the people here the people who are here, and how can we be more accessible and inviting to other communities, like the fusions of dance and acrobatics and education and music, like all of these other creative communities. How can we incorporate that within circus, within flow arts, within juggling, and really asking ourselves why that isn't happening?
Do you have any thoughts or musings on why it isn't happening? Or is it something that's kind of on the shelf in your mind that you're peering around and taking in information about right now?
Yeah, I think the history of circus arts in America is founded on white supremacy and founded on white gaze of othered bodies, right? The freak show element, not even to mention like abuse to animals that has happened in early circus arts. The barriers to access within flow and circus arts. Festivals are expensive, props are expensive. Yeah, you can make your own, but then it's kind of a different, maybe you're looked at differently. There aren't very diverse attendees at circus events, or we're just starting to see stuff around consent culture initiatives and treatment of abusers in the community. So I think all of that kind of leads it to be like a very white male dominated thing, even if it's not actively excluding people. The fact that it's not reaching out and trying to make it more accessible to more people is othering, and is not holding the space for it to be a more diverse and accepting community.
So some of the deterrents to people joining the circus arts community are accessibility, cost, microaggressions, racism, the isolationist perspective of us versus them mentality, and just like patterns from history.
Totally.
Yeah. And how, if at all, have you seen this shift or change over the years?
I think that we're starting to have more conversations about these issues in flow and juggling communities. I hear more people talking about it at events. I hear people using online platforms to start these dialogues and discussions. I've seen organizers step up and ask what they can do, or hosting diversity panels, hosting women in juggling, or like feminist juggling panels. It's the panel I'm hosting. And have been. But yeah, so I think we're having more discussions for it. I think people are having setting more space for that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the women juggling panels and the women juggling workshops that you've been
Yeah,
running?
totally. So about 2 years ago, I just got really frustrated being a woman in the juggling community, because we don't exist in a vacuum. We're not outside of all the other patriarchal and racist and homophobic reality of the United States of America right now. Like, we don't exist outside of that. However, there's so much spiritual bypassing, and like, we're all one, and it's all love, and like, I don't see race here, we're all flow me. It's like, that's bullshit. All of that. And especially like as I've become more involved with queer communities where I live, and with social circus and like larger circus communities outside of juggling and floor arts specific, it's made me really realize like how antiquated flow arts are in the realm of social justice and like progressive change. So all of that combined, it like really led me to like tap out of the juggling community, which is something I identified with for so long, and which I also recognize as a place of privilege as me, of a white person, that ability to tap out.
Are you willing to share a list of like some of the things you started noticing?
So, okay, things that I have experienced that led me to want to kind of tap out of the community for a bit. Microaggressions, the double standard of women needing to present a very specific way on stage, where then we have a cis white dude show up in gray sweatpants and a tank top, who's technically very skilled and is just applauded for his ability. Whereas if a woman did that, it would be this whole double standard of them not presenting, not wearing makeup, not looking sexy or attractive. So that double standard, as well as just being kind of looked down on for my skill, and mansplain tricks that maybe I didn't want explained to me.
I'm gonna interrupt right here because I feel like that's a big one. Sometimes people are like trying to wait a whole year to explore a prop completely on their own, or a concept completely on their own, because it's different when you grasp it yourself and you see it from multiple angles rather than just here's the way to do it.
Yeah, I think we should practice consent culture in asking people if they want advice or help with tricks. There's nothing wrong if you see someone maybe floundering with a prop and you want to connect with them. Hey, can I show you a trick? Approaching it from a not from a scarcity mindset of like, this person doesn't know what they're doing, but actually this person is bringing something really valuable right now, and maybe we can connect in that and share in this experience.
And are there any others that really come to mind?
Like I said, that circus and flow arts doesn't exist in a vacuum outside of all the other social, political issues that we face in the US, and everything that's present there is present here. Sexualization and objectification of women is a huge thing of, okay, what I'm wearing becoming important versus the skill that I'm doing, how I'm moving my body becoming more important than the expression and the autonomy that I have, as well as homophobia, transphobia, white feminism, for sure.
And I'm guessing that at these women in juggling workshops that you've been having and these panels, that some of these topics have probably been coming up. What else is coming up or coming out of these workshops?
Yeah, so the workshop's really based on holding a container for women and femmes and to express their feelings and like what has been coming up. Of course, right now it's coronavirus, and so we haven't had many in-person workshops at all. The last one was at Club Congress in end of January. And in that workshop, it's also a space for cisgendered men to sit and listen to the voices that aren't always amplified in the community.
That's so interesting. And that's really great to know that you don't have to be woman identifying to show up to these workshops, to learn from these workshops, to hear what's going on in the workshops, because it can be really valuable to gain insight from just sitting, listening, and observing.
Totally. And I also see the value in having a women and femme only space, because that does create a safer environment. At Pacific Fire Gathering a couple years ago, I did a women and femmes only juggle jam. And it was just like a regular jam, but it was all women and femme identified people. And it was just so refreshing and so nice. So I think there's value in both. And I think if it is an inclusive event, like the panel that I'm leading for the International Jugglers Association E-Festival is open to everyone, but has restrictions for cis men in the chat, which are submit your questions ahead of time, stay on mute, and basically don't like dominate the conversation. It's not a space for you, and it's actually such a privilege that you are able to be here and listening to what's happening.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that the emergence of these spaces is not to disclude, it's rather to amplify and better understand a community who's currently in the community and where it can go in the future, by just putting like a magnifying lens at things that have not been being seen or discussed. Do you have a vision for a more equitable and inclusive community coming about? Or what specific actions do you believe are necessary for that to happen? Solve all our problems.
Yeah. I think being a white dominated community, we need to really take the steps to identify the white supremacist culture that we enable. And I think lots of time people think of white supremacy as like a very overt racist action, but I would encourage everyone to look up White Supremacist Culture Values by Tema Okun, and it really breaks down the different covert layers of white supremacy that show up in our relationships, in our communities, in our workplaces. And it's things like perfectionism, either or thinking, paternalism, all of these things, worship of the written word, it has to be written for it to be real. And I think that the more we can do as white people to like understand how we're perpetuating that will help our communities change, because a lot of that is wrapped up in patriarchy and wrapped up in sexism and unequal treatment of women. Like, yeah, white feminism is totally a thing, and we're not gonna be progressive or like enacting any like larger community change until we address all the intersections of oppression. That means race and class and gender, able-bodiedness. Yeah, so I don't know, do the work.
Let's switch gears for a moment. I'm so happy we delved into exploring what work needs to be done for ourselves, what work can we be doing, and what are some opportunities to be doing that work well within specifically the social circus, the juggling community. But you've also expanded your perspective by traveling the world. And you performed while traveling the world, such as with Clowns Without Borders. How did this come about?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I did an internship with Clowns Without Borders as part of my certificate in nonprofit management program. And so I worked with them behind the scenes, writing grants and supporting their social media and membership drives. And that's how I was first connected with the organization, through the executive director. That was 4 years ago, and I've kind of been like itching to go on a tour that entire time. Clowns Without Borders is an organization that has 17 chapters worldwide. The USA one was founded in 1992. And they do call outs for performers. They say, okay, we have these dates coming up. Here's the specifics we want. Send us your interest and availability, kind of that thing. And it goes out to a list of hundreds of clowns. They also partner and have been making a more concentrated effort on partnering with other chapters of Clowns Without Borders, as well as local performers and clown groups in the regions that we're traveling to. So it was kind of just, history with the organization, and then this call out to go to Ecuador. They were looking for musicians, clowns, and fluency in Spanish. So that was kind of my whole deal.
That's awesome. So you applied and you got accepted. And then once you were in Ecuador and you were performing, what was that experience like? Was it different to travel and perform at the same time versus when you've traveled in the past?
Basically, it's like real world, you're thrown into a house with 4 clowns and you have 12 hours to create a show that you're gonna go perform, all in Spanish. So it was amazing. I mean, it's just a whole whirlwind of experience, and you're connecting. It was so good to connect with other artists who are so skilled and bring so many different talents. Like, everyone has a different role to play in their show. So yeah, I mean, it was exhausting, it was exhilarating, it was amazing.
What was your show that you guys created ended up being about, and how did the crowds that you performed for perceive and experience it?
Yeah, so we were performing in partnership with Servicio Jesuita a los Refugiados, which is the Jesuit refugee services in Ecuador. Primarily, we were performing for Venezuelan and Colombian refugees who had been walking or fleeing Venezuela due to the social, political, economic crisis that's happening right there. So this organization helps with housing and therapy and resources for refugees. They also help with like seeking asylum and refugee status, kind of the legal aspects of all of that. So the tour leader is this amazing clown from Mexico. Her name's Dorina Robles, and she is with La Avenue, which is a social circus organization there. And Dorina has a clown character, which is La Gallina Migrante, the migrant hen. And it was really important for us, Clowns Without Borders and Servicio Jesuita, to have a show that was talking about community and building community and addressing stereotypes of refugees within the community. So our show was about La Gallina Migrante traveling on a train. She was, La Gallina was just in a field outside, got out of the corral, was thrown on by a woman onto the train for food for the migrants who are on top of the train. And so we do this train ride, and along the train ride, La Gallina has a dream, and her dream is to learn how to fly. And it talks about her experience learning how to fly, dreams that people have who are migrating, and just her experiences along the way.
That sounds like such an amazing show to see that really intersects with what the audience members you're performing for are experiencing, and can touches into things that are really close to their heart, and a beautiful way to connect with other performers. I'm curious to know, what advice would you give to performers interested in going on the road?
So, advice to performers going on the road. I think considering your motivations, why you're doing it, what you're wanting to get out of it, why you're there. Checking in with any sense of like entitlement or white savior complex that comes out from that. I read a book called Learning Service before I went that really breaks down the issues we see with like voluntourism, especially like as a white person going to a different place. Making sure you're invited to wherever you go. Like if you go with Clowns Without Borders, we're always invited. But if you go on your own or start another tour or whatever, going with a different organization, make sure that like you're wanted there and people are asking that you be there. I think that's very important. As well as like considering like, is what we're teaching relevant to what the communities need in this moment? And I think with clowning and circus, there is so much laughter, and laughter can be this moment of levity that's created that takes people out of the situations that they're in for a moment and allowing that rest and reset. And that's super valuable and awesome.
Mm-hmm. Is there something that happens when people see an experience on stage that maybe is similar or resonates with their own that allows a release or an escape from the moment into the story that they're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's just so many emotions that come through circus arts. And witnessing a performance, like most of us can probably think about a time when we saw a performance and were taken to a different place. That became very relevant to me as the main juggler in our Clowns Without Borders tour. Was I was expecting people to laugh and think I was funny, and I remember one of our shows nobody was laughing, and I got in my head like, I'm not doing it right, people aren't laughing, oh no. And really after that show, kind of processing through it and realizing that, you know, awe, inspiration, anger, like everything, every emotion can come up through witnessing circus. And just, yeah, having space for that and allowing the audience to take from it what they need versus, you know, pushing your agenda onto it.
This may tie into what you've just expressed about really doing your research before you go, checking in about consent, deciding what it is you're communicating, what your intention for your creation is. But between the stage performances, classes, workshops, what is your creation process?
I like to be inspired by other forms of art. So like paintings, music, dance, looking at those art forms and incorporating it. One of my most recent acts was based on The Night Kitchen, which is a children's book about a boy who gets lost in a kitchen at night. And it's very like whimsical and fantastical. And so really basing, I did a baking act off of that. I think my creation process is, and this is really reinforced by the tour with Clowns Without Borders, that it's good enough. Like just put stuff out there and try, and you don't need to like consistently like refine each thing. Like the intention behind it is connection and creating. I'm not the kind of juggler that's like, this is the most innovative modern you know, contemporary circus act. It's really not as refined, and I think that's okay.
Have you ever heard of the phrase done is better than perfect?
No, but that resonates for sure.
Yeah, there is sometimes this block that people are like, oh, I'll do it later when it reaches the pinnacle of what it can be, and then it never happens. And I feel like what you were just speaking to kind of is around that idea that, you know, you can create and it can be raw and it can be messy, but it still says something.
Totally. And I think that also enforces the idea of being okay making mistakes and understanding that you will, and, you know, learn from that, committing to do better, or like learn from that next time.
And I guess what comes to mind is like you also do really big projects that were once created by people who ran it before you, such as Erin Stevens. I think she was in charge of the World Juggling Day. And now
Yeah.
for the past 3 years, you've been in the role and responsibility of organizing it. How do you prepare for this? And what's it like to step into a role that was already existing?
Preparing for World Juggling Day is at least a 6-month process. I think having the mentorship and guidance of Erin as she kind of led me into that role was incredibly helpful, and just like a gem to work with in all aspects. So that part was like very easy. I think working within the International Jugglers Association, which has a large board and lots of program directors and history, can be a bit more challenging just because there's so much more types of communication you need to have. But World Juggling Day is wild. It's it's cool to connect with lots of jugglers from around the world, and this year's World Juggling Day was especially, I felt connective because of coronavirus. And so my vision for this year was to have 24 hours of consecutive online juggling convention, because people were already starting to do that with the restrictions of COVID. That made it really easy to reach out to organizers and even in the Zoom calls for the juggling conventions and be like, hi, you're doing this. Do you want to do it on this day and be a part of this global event? And resounding yeses all around. So preparing for that was connecting with organizers in the 6 inhabitable continents and coordinating an online event, creating schedules, lots of coordination, also coordinating the social media and how we promote that and present that. We had a super solid team of volunteers and organizers who would just hop on IJA social media, repost things, and help spread that, because Erin has helped build such a vast platform for IJA.
That is beautiful to hear that already people were connecting in this virtual sphere, given the fact that we aren't able to gather in person together with the global pandemic, but there are still ways to connect. And so like tapping into those existing meetups and then sharing like, hey, let's do this more specifically on International Juggling Day, and here's how you can connect, was such an integral part to that process of preparation. What are some of the inspiring things you saw or people you connected with during the course of orchestrating this?
So a funny moment I had, because of all the different time zones, World Juggling Day for me started on Friday and ended on like Sunday early morning. And so Friday night I was like looking through trying to start posting, and I found the Japanese page and they had a Discord channel, and I logged in and I think I joined some random chat. It was all in Japanese. I didn't have like a translator on my computer, and so that was pretty comical, but cool. Like I was very inspired by Japan's like celebration of World Juggling Day. Like their whole Twitter was filled up with, they did a art contest for juggling art. That was so cool to see. They had this whole Discord channel. They had gala shows that they live streamed on YouTube, which is just so cool that we were able to witness that from being in North America.
That's amazing. It sounds like they're really organized and they didn't just have one idea. They put a lot of ideas into action on the day between contest and recognition of the community in a variety of ways.
Yeah, so big ups to Japan. Y'all did great. It was super cool. And yeah, just everywhere. Ecuador, Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Mexico, everywhere. Connecting with the Cyber Juggling Convention for Europe, in Australia and New Zealand. They were running events.
When you talk about this desire for folks who are within organizations to see each other succeed and mentor or assist or bolster projects, what are some of your favorite creative projects that you've worked on and why?
So one of my most favorite was working with an Oakland organization called Circus of Smiles, who ran after school circus and performing arts curriculum in schools around the East Bay. And I did that position remotely from where I was living, helping write curriculum and having that focus on social emotional skill building and accessible circus arts for first grade to fifth graders. So it's like this huge range along the realm of child development and motor skills and coordination. But I think the owners of that company, it's a small company, were very supportive of my process in that. And I feel like I learned so much information from collaborating virtually, and also knowing that then this curriculum is being taught by other circus artists in schools for kids. Like that whole process was very creative and a creative writing opportunity, and one of the most creative opportunities I had building curriculum for youth.
And in addition to writing curriculum for students that you work with this organization and other organizations you're now working with, you've also written blog posts in the past for eJuggle and for the Traveling Circus. What draws you to the medium of writing?
I think for me, it's a lot of processing and a lot of sharing my emotional experience through writing. So I like telling stories. I think people are attracted to stories. I like reading stories. And I think it's very easy to feel kind of saturated when you're involved in a community for so long, that everyone around me thinks the same way about things, and we all work similarly and have similar experiences. But then when you step outside of that or travel or go somewhere, you realize that that's not true at all. And I think sharing those stories can be beneficial for maybe other people who don't know or aren't a part of circus. And I think having the privilege of travel and connecting with juggling communities in all different continents and countries allows for a very broad perspective, because like the way people circus in South America is entirely different than Europe, different than the United States, different than Mexico, different than Japan.
Yeah, and then even within those countries, you're going to have a difference between people who are studying at, say, a circus academy, to people who are street performers, to people who bus, to people who are, playing with circus for the reason of community and connection and something as an outlet for their expression outside of their day job. Within this variation, do you see at all any commonalities of culture or commonality of beliefs?
If you're spending hours of your week playing with inanimate objects, like you're basically a weirdo. I think everyone's weirdos, as like, contemporary as you want to take it to, as like, it doesn't exist on a binary, but like if you're like a contemporary performer versus a street performer versus a hobbyist, a professional, a fire performer,
We all love to take some time, and we're literally dropping into our bodies to interact with an object. And if someone were to walk by who had never seen that or had that opportunity to experience that, they may be like, why is that person so enamored with the ball?
And like circus arts has existed in many cultures throughout human existence. Like this new contemporary wave is learning and leaning so heavily on what was here before it.
Do you have a consistent personal practice? And if so, would you be willing to tell us about what it is and how you maintain it?
Yeah, I try and move my body as often as possible and as often as I can. That looks different in lots of different, each day that looks different. With juggling, I'm not so regimented on what I'm learning. I feel like I go through phases of, I really want this, I really want 5 clubs. Okay, I'm going to train it this much per day. I really want this thing, or seeing a video and being inspired to recreate that trick and then see what pathways that opens for me. I drink a lot of water, which is helpful. And I think now that I've been more involved with like more physical circus arts, like I've been training flexibility and aerials and tumbling, I've been more focused on body awareness and like physical strength. That feels really good. And so trying to maintain that and eat enough to help grow my body.
I like that perspective. You know, sometimes I have artists on here and they're like, well, it has to be 10 minutes every morning. And I've been so inspired by that. And yet I find I'm drawn to variety. I need variety and spice in my life.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that as an artist, we get to also hear that there are other ways to have consistent daily practices, such as having an overarching value that you maintain. Movement will be present, the movement can change. It doesn't have to be. What is your ideal world?
I think existing in a world that is centered on creating community and community care for everybody involved, destroying capitalism, abolishing police, racial equity, spaces for art and creativity to be valued and supported, and to pay everyone enough to live and exist. It feels very ideal. Prioritizing and paying reparations for people who haven't been prioritized, who have actively been dehumanized. Clean drinking water, healthy food, no more billionaires. All of that sounds beautiful. What does that look like? Community, showing up and caring for one another and creating and understanding how everybody's vibration or energy or impact is part of our existing as humans.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really like your vision for the world and am curious to know where we go from here. Final question. If you could step into my shoes, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't ask you?
Maybe what are you doing to support the juggling community in its anti-racist and feminist work? I think we did kind of touch on that, but I want to plug the Feminist Juggling Workshop again because I'm really looking forward to it. It's with the IJA, the International Jugglers Association, as part of their E-Festival, which is running July 13th through 19th. And our Feminist Juggling Panel is on July 19th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It'll also be broadcasted on Circus Talk, which is a circus website that's really doing also really amazing work and is a great resource for circus artists. Our panelists are Sonal Agarwal, Love Michaela Lynn, West Desert Rose, Dallas Newton, Millionaire, and Lucy Juggles. And it's an incredible panel of voices. Each one of these people has a big influence on the juggling and flow arts communities. And I'm super excited to be lightly moderating the panel, but mostly just giving them all space to talk about what they want to talk about right now. And I think to answer the question that I asked would be that, like, what we need to be doing as white organizers or men in places of power is really distributing that power to voices that have been lesser heard in the community forever. And not being attached exactly to how that looks, but just letting it evolve as it needs to under the direction of people who are impacted by the oppression that the circus and juggling communities fosters.
Thank you so much for touching upon that once again. And also for listeners, the links for the workshop are going to be in the show notes below. So if you're like, oh, I didn't catch that in time, look below. And you can still join because it's going to be later on this month. Thank you so much for your time today, Josie. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And we can't wait to hear from you again and see more of what you create and put on